Hi, this is Chase McWhorter, Managing Director with IREI. We're continuing our series on asset management best practices. Today, we're joined by Bill Abramowitz with Nuveen. We're going to be talking about healthcare, medical office, some senior housing. And again, this series kind of continues down the path of what we've heard really going into 2024. Asset management not necessarily being at the forefront of a lot of discussions for maybe the 15 years prior with low rates. So I'll let Bill introduce himself and appreciate him taking the time. So, Bill, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Chase. So Bill Abramowitz, I'm a portfolio manager at Nuveen Real Estate. I manage a couple of our strategies, which are both based in healthcare, in particular in the medical office and the senior living space as well.
Perfect. Again, I think you're probably the seventh or eighth out of 11 we're going to do. And we've asked pretty much the same questions. We're just trying to, again, dig into kind of the specifics to each asset class. So, starting with kind of the basic question. So, I mean, how do you define asset management in your role? And then, even further to that, what does the day-to-day look like for asset management in medical office, healthcare?
Yeah, well, that's probably a good place to start, Chase, and that's kind of the critical question. I would say at Nuveen, and probably broadly, people would define asset management, and in particular, great asset management, as those that can really own the asset and drive performance, right? We understand certainly there's a lot that goes into buying real estate on the front side and make sure you're buying at the right price in the right location in the right sectors, but really driving value from day one plus is really kind of where a lot of the magic happens. And great asset managers and great asset management teams really thrive on executing and driving value through an ownership period.
And then as far as kind of expanding on the day-to-day, I mean, and we've talked industrial, light industrial, senior housing, mixed use, kind of from a day-to-day, what are some of the key things? We've heard an increased focus on going through kind of the different loans within the portfolio, just more critical eyes on certain things. So, what would you say are some important trends shaping asset management today? What are some of the trends, shifts from past few years? If you can maybe just expand on that.
Yeah, I think, it's a constantly changing environment, but I do think it's important to kind of remember the basics, right? To really kind of put your best foot forward. We see asset management and performing on it as being a proactive rather than a reactive function, right? So great asset management really involves kind of getting out there, and you have kind of, I would think about it almost in two ways. You have kind of the X's and the O's of operating the assets every day, right?
Mhm.
Making sure that the systems are running, making sure that your tenants are happy, making sure that you're reacting to any concerns that any of your third party service providers have. And then
Mhm.
there's the kind of everything else, which unfortunately is a lot of times is just kind of dealing with the unexpected, right? And I imagine some of the other folks that you've talked to on the asset management side talked about this, that anything can happen every day, right? And problem solving and being able to kind of react to those situations is really where you kind of separate, a normal kind of execution of a business plan with really being able to kind of perform and drive value.
Mhm. Would you say, I mean, kind of looking at the last couple years, rates increasing, you talk about kind of it's more than just acquiring these assets at a good price, good location. Would you
Yep.
say, given kind of the previous 10 plus years of rates going down, was asset management becoming, and this isn't necessarily for specific to Nuveen, but just maybe more broadly, did you see it within the industry? Was it becoming more of a reactionary function because you were getting a good cost basis? You were seeing cap rates compress. Was there kind of a complacency
Yeah.
in being reactive?
Yeah, look, that's a fair question, right? I mean, rising tide lifts all boats or
Yeah.
all ships. Yeah, it's harder, in a strong environment, in the conditions that you just described, smaller mistakes can kind of fade away or aren't as noticeable.
Yeah.
In a more competitive environment where you're fighting for every basis point of performance,
Yeah.
you really have to make sure that you're on your A game. So yeah, totally agree with you. I would like to say that we have kept the same stringent standards through cycles, right? Which
Yeah.
is why we've seen really good, strong relative performance through cycles. But yeah, when it's a more competitive environment, and I think, when I completely agree with your opening comments that, healthcare investing has gone a little bit from more of a niche investment class to a, fully fledged institutional investment class that you almost have to have an allocation to. With
Yeah.
that, we've seen a lot more competition, right? And we've seen a lot more folks get into the business. We've been in the healthcare space for 10 plus years. We have a healthcare team that all they do, all day, every day is invest and manage healthcare assets, both MOBs and seniors, and then a few other even nichier categories. So you really have to kind of push for performance and really kind of, turn over every stone and be really on top of your game. So, completely agree with your comments.
Yeah. Well, and I think maybe this even goes to the next question here. I mean, as far as Nuveen operating across multiple sectors, now 10 years in healthcare, so operating across these multiple sectors, what would you say are some core asset management principles that translate across these sectors?
Yeah, so I think broadly, like across sectors, that first one I would go back to is just being proactive rather than reactive, right?
Yeah.
So you can't sit there and wait for the phone to ring. You can't kind of get to know a tenant when an issue arises. Um, you can't get to know a market when an issue arises, right? You have to
Yeah.
be kind of one step ahead at all times. And it's really about accountability, right? Asset managers really need to own the asset, right? It's
Yeah.
their job to understand what the business plan is and to execute on that plan each and every day. And sometimes you can, as you kind of said, when you take your foot off the gas a little bit, you can be lulled into kind of a false sense of security, especially if it's an asset that maybe isn't as dynamic. Maybe it's an asset that only has a single tenant and they've got a bunch of term left on their lease and the asset's in relatively good shape. If you take your eye off the ball, inevitably something will happen. And you
Yeah.
don't at that point have time to kind of get up to speed. So I think we do a really good job. And I think the great asset managers out there do a really good job of just being present and involved kind of on a day-to-day basis and really taking ownership, right? That's what it's all about at the end of the day.
Yeah, and we have heard again, kind of in a all ships rising with the tide market, kind of the complacency that trickled in, and just increasingly these asset managers kind of making it more a point
More point
to get out
to
there
get out.
quarterly, to be on the property, on site, talking to the tenant. Um, and I guess we talked about kind of the principles that translate across sectors. Where would you say you see kind of the biggest differences in asset management across these sectors? Maybe healthcare compared to others.
Yeah. So yeah, healthcare certainly all the sectors have their uniqueness. With healthcare in particular, it's kind of critically important that you form a relationship with the underlying tenants and understand how to support their business,
Yeah,
right? And really looking at it less transactionally between landlord and tenant and more as a partner and a support system, whether that's, a really large institutional multi-market healthcare system or it's a smaller kind of private practice, doctor's group or physician's practice.
okay.
Supporting them because the work that they're doing, besides being kind of critically medically important, um, it, there's a lot more that goes into it, right? So I think about an example. If you're running a building and an elevator goes offline in an office building, It's not ideal, right? You'll have some unhappy tenants. Maybe they have to work from home for a couple of days while you get it fixed. Um, or, use the stairs or, alternate ways to get in and out of the building. In a medical facility, let's say it's a day surgery center, if you go in for a knee operation, you have to make sure that the elevators work, right?
Yeah.
And for an orthopedics practice in this example to have to cancel out a day or two of surgeries, that's a huge hit to their business, right? There is no work from home model to healthcare investing or to
Yeah.
healthcare operations. And that's part of the reason why we really like it, right? We've seen a lot of disruption in the traditional office space over the last number of years. Work from home in the United States has still been pretty sticky. Um, but within the healthcare space, really, it's kind of mission critical space, right? You have to have people within those spaces working and providing services to their underlying customers and patients every day.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Again, that's part of the reason we even wanted to do this was just knowing the nuances between like you don't have that issue in industrial as far as and that's obvious with elevators, but just the mission critical, if an elevator goes out, I mean that is yeah, catastrophic. So what role does technology play in asset management for you guys?
Yeah, so increasingly a bigger and more significant role. I would say at a high level, it's making everything more efficient. And it probably aligns with other, technology advances in the last kind of 10, 15 years, just around data collection
Yeah.
and then, synthesis and being able to kind of drive value out of having all of that data, right? Because they're kind of two separate pieces. So we use a lot of data for systems measurement and monitoring. Part of the kind of structure of medical office investing in particular is these are generally small assets. Average asset size could be about 20 million across the market. So at Nuveen, we own about 2.2, 2.3 billion in MOB assets, and they're spread throughout the country. So it's a lot of assets to monitor and keep a handle on. And vis-a-vis my comments about being really proactive and involved, it would be very difficult to kind of be in those assets every day, even for a platform of our size. But we've used technology to kind of get real-time access to systems, real-time access to tenants within those markets to really kind of improve our ability to have a finger on the pulse every day again, and having that access point, and then frankly being able to know when there's an issue and kind of being able to solve that issue in real time. So yeah, technology has been great for us. We're using some AI based programs now as an example, just to do kind of like lease abstraction. Um,
Okay.
which saves a huge amount of time, saves a huge amount of dollars in terms of legal costs to have that work done manually, and makes us more efficient. Ultimately, the more time we can spend kind of servicing our tenants, servicing our clients, and being kind of away from that type of work, we're going to be able to drive more value as well.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of one of the things we've heard regularly is there's a difference between just gathering data using technology for the sake of gathering data and then making it actionable stuff you can actually use.
Yeah.
Um, what insights do you have for investors? I mean, kind of a little bit of background on even this whole series we're doing. And it goes back to seeing a lot of research the last year and a half, just groups going to focus on asset management, all those kind of things in a tougher, higher rate environment. So a lot of what we've been kind of information that's been requested of us from the investor side has been, okay, what does this mean? So what insights do you have for investors when they're doing their due diligence about asset management? What kind of questions should they be asking, do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Um, I think you would want to really understand how that investment manager prioritizes the asset management function and where they sit in the overall kind of organization.
Okay.
Um, I think you can probably tell from the way I've described it, it's crucially important for us,
Yeah.
and we prioritize it. I can tell you. and this would kind of go to some of the questions that an investor may want to ask is, our asset management team works hand in hand with our acquisitions team, right? So that they're involved in underwriting when they are, they're part of developing the business plan, right? So that they know all of those kind of goals that are set on day one,
Yeah.
and are aligned with executing on those through a hold period. So making sure that there's that good continuity between the buy and the management is really important. And I would ask them, questions less around, I'm sure everyone has their performance stats, right? So that's kind of a given, examples of where they've driven performance. But I would also ask them, hey, tell me about some issues that you've run into and how you solve those, right? Because there are always issues, right? Even being proactive, staying on top of tenants and maintenance and everything else, things just happen, right? Every day asset managers come in and they probably have a list of things they want to get done. And then, before the end of the day, five more things end up on that list that they weren't expecting. So it's kind of like playing multiple games of chess at the same time. And you have to kind of keep progressing everything at the same time. But if you can really figure out how a company thinks about problem solving and how they work through those issues and how they find solutions, I think that's probably really valuable to find in an investment manager.
Interesting. Yeah, almost at the starting point, how involved are you in the acquisition, building out the business plan, and then almost case studies of give some examples of yeah, problems you've had to solve in real time. Um, no, I think that's great advice. I last question here. So, what would you say are your expectations? What's your kind of outlook for the year, maybe even multiple years ahead when it comes to asset management? Things that you're working on to improve that function, just broadly with asset management, kind of what are your expectations for the years ahead?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time thinking about, how the market is going to develop and change, and it always does. We continue to believe that, in particular, the healthcare sectors will see continued interest and will continue along the path that they have to become more institutional, more in demand. And in that environment, you have to kind of separate yourselves, right? So driving value, again, post acquisition is really going to be where the rubber meets the road.
Hmm.
So kind of all the things that we've talked about, right? You're using technology to become more efficient, staying as deeply involved with the relationships. So both with kind of your tenants and the healthcare systems that support those tenants, also with your third party partners, right? So leasing, property management, really making sure that you are with experts in that business as
Yeah.
well, right? Because there's probably a lot of, as an example, property managers that will take a medical outpatient assignment who aren't necessarily experts in that field, and understandably want to grow into a great business as well. But really having confidence in the expertise and experience of your providers is crucially important, right? For us, we've been in this business for 10 plus years. And we really take all of the lessons that we've learned over that time and we really try to kind of build off of that.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great way to finish. I mean, I would just say one thing we continue to hear is kind of the optimism coming from a lot of investment managers the last few years. A lot of it ties to asset management, basically a way to differentiate yourself. That kind of the all ships rising with the tide. I think you're starting to see the competitive nature of a lot of groups being like, okay, this is where we can really show where we're different, how our asset management is driving value. So I think that's a great kind of finishing point is just, yeah, I think that there is optimism, but it's going to require a lot of work. So I want to thank you for your time, Bill. No, this has been great. So we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to have this discussion. And yeah, we look forward to maybe doing a follow-up here and towards the end of the year to see how things have evolved.
Perfect. Would love to do it. Thanks for the time, Chase.
Thank you.